But good evening. My name is Linda Francis. I'm Director of Success of All Youth. Thank you for coming out this evening. We realize that this is time spent away from home and family, and we recognize that you have made this conversation a priority by being here. So thank you. SAY's mission is to help our community work together to empower every young person to reach their full potential. We've gathered information and data on 10 indicators of child and youth well-being and are facilitating a number of community partners in working together to improve outcomes in these areas while using an equity lens. That means that we don't just consider the needs and outcomes of the majority. We consider how our community systems affect all of our kids and work to create systems that support all of our kids. Now notice I said systems and not institutions. In our very complex world, no one institution stands alone in addressing these issues. We don't just have schools, we have educational systems. We don't just have doctors or hospitals, we have physical and mental health systems. These systems span our community members, organizations, and institutions. We each have a role to play in making them better, and we are increasingly breaking down our silos and learning to work together. Tonight is the first of 4 planned conversations, each highlighting different aspects of the community in which work is occurring or needs to occur. These conversations and our monthly Say Connects publication, hopefully you saw those outside, which can be found on the 4th Wednesday of each month in the Wednesday Journal, are made possible by a grant to the Wednesday Journal from the Good Heart Work Smart Foundation. Tonight, we are focusing on the work of 5 specific community efforts. It is our hope that you leave tonight with more information about the barriers and successes faced in this work, what is currently being done, and what you can do to support these efforts. We hope to leave tonight with a greater sense of what SAY and the Wednesday Journal can do to improve our role. Tonight is not intended to cover all aspects of equity, or even racial equity for that matter. We can't do that justice in 90 minutes. The challenges we face existed before the documentary and before the hate-related events of the last couple of months. The question remains, what are we willing to do to create lasting change? SAY commits to follow up and continue the conversation in subsequent gatherings, through the SAY Connects publication, website, and social media, and through our work with our community partners. January 17th's gathering will focus on youth-led efforts. So please go ahead and put that date in your calendar, but as adults, we will be there to just listen. Once again, thank you for coming. Please use the cards that we have provided to submit questions or prompts for the conversation. We'll come around and collect them. And now, Isaiah Makar will help us get in an equity frame of mind. Thank you.
Hi, folks. My name is Carmen. Before we have Isaiah come up, I just wanted to make an announcement. There's a car blocking the wraparound in the lot, so if that's your car, I don't know what make it is, but the custodian just asked us if anybody left their car in the wraparound to move it, else they're going to tow it. Otherwise, Isaiah.
So the title of this piece is called Shot of Influence. Bullet points for us, bullet points at them. We take shots at the bar, they take shots at the limbs. Can a happy hour exist if you're doing time for a crime you were forced to commit? Their lives were poured and the glass half empty. It's time we take a sip. Bullet points for us, bullet points at them. We take shots at the bar, they take shots at the limbs. Can a happy hour exist if you're doing time for a crime you were forced to commit? Their lives were poured and the glass half empty. It's time we take a sip. Class begins. Miller asked me if he has to read his poem aloud or if he's allowed to pass. He serves me this smirk and an ice cold can of sass. I laugh and tell him no, everybody's gotta go up to the front, so how about you just get it over with? Miller slowly gets up from his seat, and I wasn't sure if the slurs in his speech were from nerves or perhaps his words lacked the muscle to corkscrew the bottle of emotions most men are too afraid to slurp. He spits out a verse about how bloody Mary was from a shooting at a church where a gang tried to jack Daniel's chain from his shirt. See, Miller comes to class every day with the trauma hangover. Now I see why his grades haven't been sober. Once class was over, I tried to talk to him one-on-one, but his shoulder was colder than the can of sass he served me. He says, your blood type is Oak Park positive, mine West Side negative. Your tolerance is high there, ours is low here. We would die to go to school there. We dying going to school here. Y'all study horoscopes, we live in horror through a scope. Y'all have everything y'all need and still whine, but y'all don't give a grape about the most impoverished hoods. I hope you keep chugging your Suburban, I'll be throwing up my ghetto. Your life is straight, a glass of God, mine on the rocks, a glass of devil. All blood types are not alike. Mine dark, yours light, don't mix. But what if we switch? Would it taste like bullet points? For me, this time the bullet will point at you. I'll take shots at the bar, you take shots at the limbs too. A happy hour cannot exist if I'm doing time for crimes I'm forced to commit. My life was poured and the glass half empty. It's time you took a sip. Thank you.
Well, hello there. Is anybody out there? Hello. My name is Doris Davenport, and I'm the host of The Doris Davenport Show. It's a radio program that broadcasts right out of Oak Park River Forest on Sunday evenings from 6 to 8 p.m., right at the top of the Oak Park Arms. You can hear us from 6 to 8 on Sundays, and then I also broadcast from WCPT on Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. Tonight, you're going to hear from soldiers of love, soldiers who are on the ground, committed, willing, and able to lead, to take charge, to collaborate, to listen, and to do. In your programs are bios of the panelists, so please take a minute and read those when you have a chance. But I'd like to introduce them to you in a little bit of a different way. I thought it might be helpful for you to put them through the lens from which they live every day. This first set of questions is for that purpose, getting to know you. So I want to start out by simply saying the original promise of this country, that out of the rich diversity of peoples, a great nation will rise, has only been partially fulfilled. We've had a great deal of unacknowledged and unhealed racial history in America, right? I mean, let's be honest. And as a result, around so many corners, what you find is distrust, you find fear, and even resentment. The reason, in my view, is a stubborn fact. The promise of equal opportunity and dignity for all has not been fully realized. So now, let us begin. I'm going to ask the panelists, and who we have, just raise your hand when I say your name, please. Christian Harris, founding member of Zingela. We have Dee Lambshead. Lambshead Roche. And John Bowen. My glasses have fallen somewhere. Got to have a little humor, you all. Now, John Borrero, Executive Director, Collaboration for Early Childhood. Francis Kraft, the E-Team. Maui Jones, founder and artistic director of Echo Theater Collective. Michaela Anderson, SAFE, Students Advocating for Equity. All right. Now, this is going to be kind of like speed dating, panelists. So this is not the time we want you to elaborate and give us your most profound responses. We're going to get through these first few questions just to get a hint of who you are. So think of stories that you might have heard from your parents and your grandparents, right? Think about what type of community they lived in as adults. Were the communities they lived in ethnically or racially diverse? And what is your family's racial and ethnic heritage? Why don't we start with you, Maui, and work our way down?
All right, let's check. Okay, there we go. Well, let's see. In terms of my father was born in Mississippi, and then when they moved to Chicago, he grew up in LeClaire Courts, which is projects. I don't know if it's still around anymore. I think it might be defunct now, near Midway. My mother, she grew up bougie on the north side, and then moved to Maywood, where she went to Proviso East.
Okay.
My parents did not grow up in ethnically diverse neighborhoods. My dad came from a farm in Canada, and mom in a suburb outside of DC. So that area might have had some ethnic diversity, but certainly a white dominant space. And I identify racially as white and ethnically as traced back to England.
Hi. My family's it's an interesting combination. My dad, white, grew up in Pennsylvania. My mom's side, my first language was Spanish. We spoke Spanish in the home. My mom's side, they all immigrated from Spain with the Cuban cigar trade. So some were from Cuba and some from Spain. So I grew up on stories of perseverance. We were told we were Asturian, we were Spaniards, so that really stuck with me my whole life. But I'm white. I navigate the world as a white person.
Great.
Good evening. Nice. So quickly forgot the question. So I was raised in New York City by my grandparents. So even though I wasn't raised with my mom, I think my cultural upbringing was more my grandparents. So my grandma was Black Dominican. My grandfather was white Puerto Rican. It was a Spanish-speaking household. They were both immigrants, essentially. My grandfather was a migrant farm worker before he found my grandmother in a church in New York. And my grandmother was, she was a refugee from the Dominican Republic during the time of dictatorship they had there. So that was my upbringing. It was sort of in a very interesting global sense of awareness and a newness to this country.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. My mom grew up on the west side of Chicago as well as the south suburbs. And my dad actually grew up mostly in the south suburbs, Harvey as well as, and he graduated from HF. I grew up in Oak Park. I identify as a Black man, African American. Either term works for me. And I think that's it.
Hey, so my mom and my dad are both from the west side of Chicago. My mom is Black and Native American. My dad, just Black, you know? And I identify as just a Black young woman, and I've grown up in Oak Park my whole life.
Awesome. Now look at your family conversations that you grew up listening to, thinking about how they might influence you today based on what you were exposed to. Did your parents and your grandparents openly discuss race and ethnicity? And what do you remember, good or bad, about those conversations? And then just end it with letting us know whether you live in a racially or ethnically segregated neighborhood or a diverse one. Why don't we start with you, Michaela?
Well, growing up, my parents were pretty racially conscious. You know, they slip up sometimes. They're kind of old school, but for the most part, they're pretty woke. A lot of our conversations about race were negative for the most part, which is why they moved me to Oak Park, because they heard it was diverse, just, you know, how a lot of families feel Oak Park is. And so we were having we have those conversations every night, especially since I've become, you know, an activist, and they're not seeing a lot of change. So when they moved me here, they weren't disappointed. They were just kind of reluctant, and they just weren't expecting it to be this way. But yeah. What's the second question?
Do you live in a racially and ethnically diverse neighborhood or segregated?
It depends if I'm code switching or not. Like if I'm around white people, and I can, you know, snap that on that label and how they like to view me and make them happy, then yeah, it's kind of diverse, I guess. But if I'm just in my mode, then not really. It's pretty segregated.
Okay.
Yes, I was very lucky to have two parents that talked openly and honest with me about race and race relations in the history of this country. I'm lucky to still have them both today and still have some great conversations with them. I can remember the first time I got pulled over, leaving my barbershop on the west side, talking to my dad about it, and he said, he's in the audience tonight, and he said, well, I wish I could tell you this is not going to happen again. But you're a Black man in America, it's going to happen. It's going to happen again. And I was a 16-year-old, just got my license, and it took me years to not hear sirens and have a fear, just that somebody could just pull me over and just take me out of my daily procedures. I would say Oak Park is a racially diverse community. It's interesting because we're so close to Chicago, which is, you know, very diverse community, but it's just very segregated. And Oak Park, you know, has done a good job of trying to remain unsegregated, but there's still work to be done for sure.
Speed dating. You're doing good.
You know, I think my experience was a little bit different because the people who raised me were from another country. So the sense of black and white, and they didn't consider themselves Latino, although they came from Latin America, obviously. But my grandmother, for example, although she was black, she came from a country where it really wasn't, although most people are black, it wasn't okay to be black. I remember visiting, and you'd go into establishments, and there'd be a frame outside of the door with a brown paper bag cut out, and it said, if you're darker than this piece of paper, you're not welcome here. That was the context that she grew up into. So when she came to the United States, in a very interesting way, she came with a lot of shame around who she was. And then when she came here, she had a different identity. She was Latina and not black or white in her country. And I think, so I grew up in a lot of that, and then discovering what it meant for me to grow up Latino in this country, which sometimes meant, you know, brotherhood, and sometimes meant being followed around a store, so it was a very interesting learning experience that we all had as a family together. So they didn't come prepared with a playbook on how to deal with, you know, the racial ethnic issues, but I think we worked them out together. They learned a lot through me, watching how I experienced it as a kid. Do I live in a racially diverse environment? Yeah, I think I live in Berwyn, so I don't live in Oak Park, and so I think it's not what New York was, but I think I'm very used to living in a melting pot, and so I think I brought that with me here.
Great.
So I'm I love hearing your stories because some of them, they really ring true for me as well. I would hear stories from my grandmother about what she faced in Florida. So I grew up in Florida. She wasn't allowed on the beaches growing up in Florida. There were signs posted. So I would hear those stories. They stuck with me. I never experienced any of that, but my grandparents did. But I think there was a lot of isolation in my family. I feel that I grew up in a community in Florida that was very white. It was mostly white. I think we were kind of isolated from a bigger community. I lived on a barrier island too, so that was more isolation. So I feel that a lot of what I grew up with, I've had to work through as an adult to understand race and my place in it. And I think it challenges you to kind of try to think about everything you think you know and analyze it constantly. We raised our kids in River Forest, not diverse. They did graduate from the high school, and I taught in Oak Park, love Oak Park, and live in Westtown now, so, which I love too, so.
I was born in the neighborhood of Austin, and I lived there for the first 10 years of my life, and then we moved to Oak Park. I'm not remembering specific messages or conversations about race, thinking back to my first decade. I am remembering, so certainly there was not explicit negative messages that were being said around my dinner table. So there's that. I do remember a real intentionality around who we are going to invite into our home, and who we're going to have play dates with, and like we are part of this community, and so I'm thinking back. That's what's coming to be top of mind. In terms of Oak Park, I live in Northwest Oak Park right now, which is probably the least diverse racially part of Oak Park. My block is a double block. It's amazing. We have great pizza nights and block parties. It's almost exclusively white, outside of some transracial adoptive children, and a few families. But unlike Oak Park in general, of course, is diverse. I don't know that we're as integrated as we could be in terms of who's in our homes and at our parties.
Well, for me, growing up, my parents didn't really talk much about race. I grew up we moved around a lot, but mainly up until the time I was 6, I lived on the north side of Chicago. My mother went to Loyola, so we lived in that area. And then when my parents split up when I was 6, we bounced around a bit, but mainly Maywood. And we moved in with my grandfather. And my grandfather didn't really talk about race either. He's more of a, why would you want to talk about that stuff? Let's just, bottle everything up deep inside, and, we'll let it out when we drink or when we're really angry. Moved to Oak Park when I was in high school. Freshman year of high school, I moved to Oak Park, and that was a bit of a culture shock for many strange reasons. Growing up on the north side up until I was 6, and then moving to Maywood, I stuck out like a sore thumb because I was kind of nerdy, and I grew up with like kids from all over the world in that community, and then moving into Maywood, and they're like, who's this black nerd? Let's beat him up a lot. And so I had weird identity issues growing up. I was like, okay, so black people don't like me because I'm not black enough. White people can't really connect to me because I'm not white enough. I don't know where I fit. And then I didn't really start to dig into identity stuff until my mother ran away from home when I was in high school. She became addicted to crack cocaine, became a prostitute, and then she was gone for a couple years. And that's when we really started to evaluate where we kind of sat in the world. so that was where I really started to think about race and identity, and how things are not always equal for some. In terms of where I live one block outside of Oak Park because Oak Park is expensive. So I live in Forest Park, but I have my company, Echo, that is in Oak Park. So I'm in Oak Park all the time.
Great, awesome. And now to the work. This first section is going to really focus on whether or not we can really come together as a community. So people around the country and perhaps even the world seeking a diverse community to move to hear Oak Park, River Forest in Illinois, and they think, now that's a diverse community. I'm not looking for division. I'm looking for unity. Oak Park has got it going on. Then came America to Me. What ways do you think the work in Oak Park and River Forest to accomplish true diversity, equity, and unity is incomplete? And explain that. And somewhere in your answer, give your definition of equity. Why don't we start with you, Christian?
Well, one of the things we haven't done in Oak Park and really the country as a whole is examined our systems and our institutions and from a historical standpoint and seeing who they were built for, why they were built, and what they're meant to do. So for our schools, for example, we really, if we're really going to change the schools, we have to look at how they were built and why we focus on 4 main subjects, why we have bells in between each period, why do you even go to a school 8 hours a day at all? Why? For your education. And we have to really ask ourselves, are our schools targeted at a diverse 21st century student body? And that those conversations need to be had, not just at the board level, but among teachers, among parents, and among community members in general. So I think that's all very important, and that's so definitely an area we can improve on.
Great.
What was the second question?
Give a definition of equity.
A definition of equity. I would say equity to me looks like a world where, regardless of who you are, you have a fair shake, you have a fair chance, you have the same shot. Let's say everybody has the same shot at being whoever they want to be. Yeah.
Okay. Now, it's not expected that every panelist answer every question. We'll never get through the night if everybody answers every question. So why don't you just give me a little wave if it's a question that you definitely want to respond to. And I also want to let the audience know, we have volunteers around the room that have index cards. If you have a question that you want to ask, just hold up your hand and someone will come to you and bring you the index card, because we want to make sure that your questions get asked as well. Okay? Go ahead.
So I think one thing that I would like to contribute to the dialogue that's already happening. So I'll start by saying that I'm an educator, and in almost everything I do, that comes forward, and it's going to come forward now, and say that I think when we look at children, I think we have to, or students, we have to be careful not to look at them just in the range that they're in, or silo them just with the district they belong to. I think one way that we can all move forward as a community is to really look at the range of development. So even though a lot of focus has been placed recently on high school, from an early childhood perspective, if you look at America to Me and you look at these stories, you can always see the connection back to early life. The way a young man expresses trauma in high school often goes back to trauma that he experienced when he was a young kid. So I think we would benefit as a community from having a sense of the entire span. So not just looking at 4 years of their life, let's look at the 17 years, the 20 years of a child's life, and then all the systems along that path that could collaborate and come together to really help all of our kids move forward. I think it's more than just about a slice or a moment in time. It's acknowledging a moment in time and backing up and saying, let's look and see where else this started. The high school students today were the preschool students yesterday. So if we look at the entire system, I think we'll be better off.
That's excellent. That is definitely a great response.
I would add to that, too, that I think the documentary, something that really was brought out in Sharp Focus was the relationships. And as a former teacher, you can have a child in your class an entire school year and not know that child if you don't choose to intentionally see that child and know the family. I feel like this work can't move forward unless we do it together. And actually, Oak Park, these problems aren't unique to Oak Park, but I think Oak Park, a difference is that a lot of times it's the surface, it's what we want to feel has already been done or that we're doing really well in, but there's so much work to be done. And I think we have to acknowledge it and not just know people on the surface. We have to build relationships and know each other and know each other's stories. That's why I'm glad you started with that, Doris.
Yeah.
We have to know each other's stories and really connect with people.
Maui?
So one thing I keep coming back to is these systems aren't actually broken, right? They're working as intended, right? This stuff was built in. The inequity was built in from the beginning, and American media didn't really expose anything new. It just kind of said it really loudly. So then people were like, oh, that's a problem. I didn't realize it. But the people that are on the short end of that power dynamic, they're like, what are you talking about? It's always been like that, right? Like we were just talking before this started. Unfortunately, I'm 10 years older than Christian. I just found out, it upset me. But it's like that while Michaela's there. It was like that when Christian was there. And it was like that when I was there. And I know people that are older than me. It was like that when they were there, right? So like that's nothing new. But when we're talking about stories, right? Stories are something that are very important to me. Doing theater and art and storytelling. The stories that we live in, the narrative that we live in right now is through a lens of a straight white man, right? So like everything kind of gets filtered through that. And if we don't allow spaces for those other narratives, then we can't be a whole community, right? And we can't see these people's problems because we don't know their songs and their experiences and their loves and their passions, and that's a really, really important thing, so I'm happy that you named that.
Yeah, you all are giving us some great meat. Those are the things that make it incomplete. That's why the work is incomplete. And really speaking of that, what exactly are your organizations working for or working against? So give us some specific actions and activities that you and your organizations are engaged in, why those activities, and what and who do they directly impact? Yeah.
Going again on the kind of concept of equity, I think of it not giving everybody the same thing, but giving people what they need, especially children, and that's going to look differently. After the 2016 election and the women's marches, the Facebook pages lit up with conversations between women of color and white women in the Oak Park River Forest area. And so a group of us came together to say, like, so how do we do this? Like, how do we talk to people who are white about race? And what do people need? And so for many months, a group met in my backyard and here, there, and everywhere. And the Oak Park Parent Empowerment Network was formed for people of color to support parents, as its name indicates. And then Race Conscious Dialogues was formed for people who identify as white. So everybody in one room all the time, the Oak Park way, let's all talk about race. Let's try something different. Those are still important conversations to have, but sometimes different, in the name of equity, sometimes affinity groups can be a powerful tool.
Awesome, awesome. Christian?
Zingela Ulwazi, it's the hunt for wisdom in Xhosa, in South African language. It was the brainchild of Linda Francis, who you heard from earlier. She identified that in this community, to truly tackle equity, men of color needed to be on the front lines. So she got a group of us together, and we started along this path. And our initial goals have definitely been to attack what we call the achievement gap. And as we've gone along this path, though, we've learned that even that type of thinking is problematic, because when you talk about trying to bridge a gap, you act as though white students are the high bar, black students need to strive to achieve, and that is just not the case. Success for all of our students should be our only goal. And so we've identified that, and we've also tried to, we've realized that one of the biggest things we can do as men of color in this community is just be present. Just show up, be active members of this community. That's why every third Saturday we've committed to having a space carved out for people of color. We have different events. We've targeted mostly at reading and engaging people and getting them involved in the love of reading and why they should love to read. And it's been going pretty good. It's been about 7 or 8 months now. Maui is also a founding member as well. And we really enjoyed it so far.
Michaela?
So I'm a part of SAFE, which is Students Advocating for Equity, and currently we're working on, well, we've been working on it for a minute, but we're working on, we have the racial equity petition, then we have a racial equity curriculum, which we've been working really hard on, and so this upcoming semester, we're gonna do like a pre-pilot to just teach students. It's gonna be a student-led class, and it's gonna just talk about racial consciousness. It's gonna target second period, freshmen and sophomores. Everybody would be able to take the class. Open it up to talking about anything from colorism, white privilege, religion, just we want it to be a class that people can ask questions and have those ignorant questions that they're too afraid to ask, and have those answers and then talk about it in class, because we don't have that at OPRF. Everybody is really scared to talk about race. It makes them so uncomfortable. So giving students that space, and even the teachers that space to actually open up and hold those conversations, I think that shows equity, because we don't, a lot of people of color were told that not to talk about certain aspects of our own lives because it makes white people uncomfortable. So giving us that space where we can talk, that helps a lot. Then the racial equity petition, just to, one of the main things I know we've been working on from the petition is hiring more teachers of color, and the retention of teachers of colors at OPRF. We've been looking, I know SAFE has been looking at some of the statistics, and they're kind of alarming, so we're gonna figure out how to fix that, but we're working on a lot of in the school type stuff, because we're living it every day, so who better than us to do it? So yeah.
Great.
Echo Theater Collective, we like to use art and storytelling and theater to bring to light these issues of social injustice, and then through strong partnership programming, give people who maybe have learned something new tangible pathways to action. We believe that's our responsibility as artists to, once we're, okay, you're fired up, now meet the people that are doing the work, right? So that's on as far as the theater company, what we do. So we do things like we have an ongoing series called Sing, and we'll take a particular culture and lift them up in celebration. Because often when we talk about marginalized communities, we only talk about they're struggling and it's sad, but there's all this beautiful stuff in there as well that we forget about. So we've done one, we did one for women, we did one for children, we've done one for the Latinx community, and then we also make sure that we find a local organization that is doing work in those communities and we give part of the proceeds to them and also give them the stage for a bit so they can talk about what they're doing so people can learn about how they can help and be effective allies. So that's on the echo level, that's what I do. But then me personally, I just started an initiative, or not an initiative, but a dream really, to try and open up a cultural center in Oak Park. Using that same model, right? Art, theater, and storytelling as the catalyst. And then connecting and having in-house organizations, being able to have, like race-conscious dialogues or E-Team available to connect with the programming that's happening in there, and then to partner with our educational organizations so that we can try and create this ecosystem of social justice, right? And just create this like social change engine in our community, a place for our students to feel safe and have a lounge and things like that. So that's my big dream that I just recently announced it. So hopefully in the next couple of years we can get that going and have a space for our children to feel safe, a space for us to practice being community together and do internal work so that we can go out into the world and do the external work needed to make us a whole community.
Great. That's great. So we hear a lot about white privilege, and Lord knows it definitely exists. And people benefit, not just white people, benefit from privilege, regardless of race. If you're black and a straight A student, you might be favored over students who don't get straight A's. If you are Latino or Jewish with white skin, you may be favored like a white person. If you're dark brown in 2018, you may be favored over a person that has fair skin. But white privilege is unique. You hear this conversation. You hear our panelists talking about that. It determines entire groups of people. It undermines entire groups of people in every conceivable and inconceivable way. So there's a lot of activity in this space of equity. Some black and brown contributors to the space say that dollars go to white organizations, or that white people are making the choices about what black and brown organizations receive funding. And so I want to know, does white privilege impact your ability to accomplish your mission positively, negatively, or not at all? And what do you say to those who would ask what proof you have that there are systems in our place, that there are systems in place at any of our schools that result in excluding a student from participating in a program on the grounds of that person's race? Michaela?
Well, I encounter white privilege every day at OPRF. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's not, but well, I'll give proof first. My first year at OPRF, this white girl called me a nigger, and I didn't do anything, I didn't get up. Was arguing back though, of course. And we had a sub, a white sub. She called the security guard, and I thought it was for the girl because the white girl, because she was getting kind of crazy. So it was actually for me, and they escorted me out. And then the next day that I came back, I was kicked out of my class for 3 days because she said that my teacher told me, who's also white, she told me that if I were to speak out about it or if I brought it up ever again, she would have to completely remove me from her class. And I talked to my dean about it, and they gave me the option to mediate with the girl, and I said yeah, but the white girl did not want to mediate with me. Her parents didn't want her to mediate with me. So I think that's proof. That happened my very first year in English, and nothing's happened since then. And my mom's contacted the principal. He never responded. So yeah. And then the next year I was put in a class with her again. So what was the first question again?
Well, that's okay. That's good. That's good. I think that probably that's the best example you can have from coming from a young person who's right there in the school system. If you have something pressing, I want to just ask these two questions from the audience. They're very similar, so I think it's a good time to bring them in, and then you can...
One quick thing about that last question you said. I just want to say real quickly that there's impact and there's intent, and often I think we focus on the intent of the person that perpetrated, and we never focus on the impact of the people that are affected by it, and that's something that we need to change.
Yes. Echo. So the questions that are coming in deal with the subject matter of most of the conversations being about race. So one of you have asked, do you think changing the conversation from race or color to a human issue would be more productive? And then, related, someone has asked about a study called Adverse Childhood Experiences. And in that study, what it shows and highlights is that between teachers and students, there's a whole reproduction of racism that goes on that makes it perpetual because there's so much focus on it. What do you feel about this? If we move the conversation from race, is that appropriate?
I am a big believer that there is no race card. The whole deck is racialized. In a country that was taken based on assumed racial superiority from Native Americans who had been here for thousands of years, that was then built on the backs of free slave labor based on assumed racial superiority. And in the 20th and 21st century, a lot of the wealth that has come from oil money that was in the country, that should have been a part of Mexico, but was taken forcibly by Americans. The wealth has been built in large part due to stolen oil money from our people, from Mexicans, south of the border. So it is my belief that everything in this country has to do with race at some level, because that's how it was built. So there is no way to remove race from a conversation about equality. It's just not possible, unfortunately. It would be easier, it certainly would be, to have this conversation and think about, oh, it's just an economic issue. But unfortunately in this country, those two are tied. Those are completely tied hand in hand. And so to truly analyze our issues, race has to be taken into account, as does economic status, and as does gender, and as does sexual orientation. But yeah, race has to be a part of that conversation.
Yeah, if we're going to be successful here in Oak Park to overcome what we know and move forward together, we're going to have to be selfless with no expectation for reward. The work is going to have to come from within, and it's going to have to be enough, frankly. The work is going to have to be enough. And we've got to revive that old, I am my sister's keeper, I am my brother's keeper, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, age, or faith. Someone is very interested, Maui, in a comment that you made earlier. You made a joke about being a few years, maybe a decade, older than Christian. And what they're interested in knowing is, why was that funny? And if you can talk about the intersectionality between race and age.
Sure. It was just funny because I thought that Christian and I were pretty close to the same age. It turns out I'm 10 years older than him. But in terms of the intersectionality of race and age, so ageism is a thing, right? And the younger, so when you're a kid, right, your opinion is not valued, right? Because you don't have any money, you don't own any property. Like, what can you add to this conversation, right? That's how we think about kids. And then your opinion doesn't matter until you're 18, and then you better know everything about everything and be informed, otherwise you're terrible. And then when you are on the older end of the spectrum, your opinion is maybe not valued because, you're not working anymore, you're not a contributing member of society, so why should I listen to you? We find so many different ways to marginalize people. It's not just limited to race, even though race is, I think, one of the biggest determining factors of how we marginalize each other. We have 8 billion ways of doing that. Age, ability, physical mobility, you name it, right? We'll figure out a way to do it. All I guess I'll say on just power dynamics in general is that, how do I word this? So we all so you mentioned spectrum of trauma, all right, John, right? You said something about spectrums and how we all respond to things in different ways, right? So I think one thing that we don't realize is that white people are struggling with trauma too, right? Race-based trauma too. It's not victim-based trauma, it's perpetrator-based trauma, all right? And having to unpack that, I don't come from a world of heroes, all right? Like that's something that's tough to unpack, that here's this darkness in my history. What does that mean in terms of my identity? I hew so closely to this. What does that mean? And so I just think that we need to approach things, from a perspective of how do we fix our trauma? How do we fix each other's trauma? So.
Francis?
Add on to that as well to say that I agree, you don't take race out of the picture, but I think there is something to add in the other, what I've often called cultural indicators, so that you don't see someone you can't have a single lens view of anyone and expect to fully understand them. And you can't have just one lens and expect that's going to build a dialogue. If we're just our race, and you're not part of the same race, there's no way to have an interconnectedness. But if we're looking at how race and gender and socioeconomics and religion and disability status and sexual orientation and immigration status and all of these factors come together to impact who we are, the more ways that we can find to understand each other, the better we will understand each other. I think it's, there's a researcher, her name is Geneva Gay out of University of Washington, who outlines this way of looking at kids and education and understanding the spectrum of cultural experience and how absolutely you can't remove race because race is one of the factors upon which we hold bias and we act against each other. But I don't think we're served by having it be our only one factor. I think anyone in this room, I'm sure people who of the same race are going to say, they don't want to be I don't want to just be a Latino. I think there are many other things about me that might be different from someone else who's Latino as well. So I think the more nuanced, deeper view, I think will lead to a richer, more productive dialogue for us.
May I just quickly talk about the human question too? Yes, we're all humans. Yes, race is a social construct, but it has real everyday implications. So it does matter, even though it's a social construct. And so to just, push it aside really negates the harmful things that are happening every single day. What's not happening in Oak Park as we talk about race is discussions about whiteness. It's always race meaning people of color. But that, I think that's highly problematic because the white power structure that does exist in all of our systems here, to not address that means that we don't move forward and we don't actually create lasting change. So it would be great if we could get to the point of being humans, but that negates not only damage that is happening, but also celebrations of like Black excellence and other ways we can actually celebrate who we are.
Did you want to add something, Francis?
Yeah, thanks, Doris. I think that the problem is that we have waited so long to talk about race that those conversations haven't been had. And I think when we talk about ACEs or we talk about trauma, sometimes because people have not done their internal work, the trauma is happening in the classroom where our kids spend so much of their time, whether it's with kids or it's from a teacher to a child, because that work hasn't been done. As part of the documentary, a team of us had weekly circles at the high school after each screening, and we had questions, guiding questions, and it was an opportunity. We listened. What E-Team tries to do is really listen to what families, students, and teachers say they need or they want. And we listened to people going into planning those sessions, and there was a lot of fear about what were we going to uncover, and it was very scary. And we really tried to take care with that process, not to harm anyone in that process. And I'm talking more about our Black community members having to explain and relive their trauma by trying to educate white people. And so that's something also to consider. But we're finally getting together again. The high school has opened up the cafeteria to us to start again now that the screenings are over. And some nights we had 250 people there with facilitators in groups of 10. And it's scary work, but in my opinion, that's the work that has to happen.
Yeah, that's good. Too often we train our kids to go along, to get along. You know, don't upset the status quo. Leave that to other people to do. You know, you focus on your homework, but we have to understand that it is their stepping up and speaking out that helps them to find their voice. And their courage, and frankly, their will and their dreams. Francis, stay there for a minute and tell us what, in your organization, how do you directly impact equity?
Well, I'm going to try to keep it brief because sometimes it's hard to put it all in buckets. Something we do is we have a family resource network, and so we really have this intentional goal of reaching families, students, and teachers to have these conversations. It can be anything from what is your child not, what is the system, because it is the system. I go back to what Christian was saying. What is happening in the system that is not working for all of our kids? It may just be a conversation, to help to find a family, to find their voice, to talk to a teacher, to change how that child is being seen in the classroom. It might be that. We monitor grades and all of that, so sometimes it's tutoring. A child needs more academic support. We were hearing that families were not happy with the summer school program in D97, so we served as like an incubator. We partnered. I'm so happy that we have connections with everyone on this panel, but the library opened up 2 floors to us this summer. We had 50 students. We had generous funding. The district worked with us, and we tried approaching summer school an entirely different way, with seeing kids, forming great, deep relationships with their families, monitoring. The majority of our kids grew an entire year in reading in 20 days. Yeah, it was pretty amazing. But we want to change the system, so that means now we work with D97, and we're talking about how can summer school now, how can we inform next summer? How can you do some of this in D97, partnering with them, not fighting them, pushing and pulling, but now can we change the system so summer school, more kids get access, and also bringing what D97 is doing right with summer school, but kind of blending, but bringing the community and its resources together for what can really be a powerful experience for all of our kids.
Great. John, for collaboration for early childhood education, specifically impacting equity.
So there are 4,800 children under 5 in Oak Park and River Forest, and we represent them. Our job is to be a voice for what their needs are, and to make sure that they get to kindergarten well, and to look at the obstacles that they encounter along all of those cultural indicators that I talked about a second ago, and ways in which we can help level that playing field. So we know, for example, and it's not a common statistic, that the rate of expulsion in preschool is many times the rate of any other grade level in a child's career. Believe it or not, children are expelled under 5 in that range more than any other age, and any other school range. So one of the things we work on is we work on teacher capacity to work with kids. We work with parents and help develop their capacity to be active participants and leaders in their children's life. They're great first teachers. So we have the parent, teacher, and child triad, and we work with pediatricians to make sure that they have proper health, connections to health, removing obstacles that might get in a kid's way. Now, how this addresses equity, it's not just around issues of bias, but it's access to information, access to resources, the support that different families might not have. So if a family's coming from a distinct lack of resources or fiscal resources, a lot of what we do is to help level that playing field. So where they normally wouldn't have access to training or empowerment work or access to proper information about healthcare, we help level that. We help give them what another family might have who comes from a more empowerment or greater, a background of greater resources. Okay. So it's not for young kids, even though it's in the age when they're developing their sense of race and culture, it may not look the same way it does for older kids. What it looks like for our age is making sure that we're giving so much power to that dynamic to make sure that when they get to kindergarten and enter the school system, that they're charged, they're ready for the success that they're meant to have later.
Great. Christian, I think you're the only one who answered that question the last time, so we're going to go back down the other way. Dot, why don't you tell us what Race-Conscious Dialogues is doing to directly impact equity?
Well, there's no shortage of dynamic organizations and work that is being done and led by people of color in Oak Park, and has been for a really, really long time. So the elephant in the room is, why isn't change happening? If we have all of these really amazing leaders that are doing great things and working really hard. And for people who identify as white in Oak Park, that's something for us to directly consider and do some personal work. So the Race Conscious Dialogues, right now as it stands, it's 4 sessions, it's like a class. 4 sessions, 3 hours each. There's a binder, there's homework, there's reading, and it's done in exclusively white spaces, which is new. A new kind of approach for some of us in Oak Park. And it's a way to look around a circle and say, and turn the lens back on ourselves, right, without impacting harm. As we work through our stuff, sometimes when it comes out and we're working through it, it's ugly and harmful things are said. And so we don't have to impact harm on people of color as we are doing our own work. The last thing I'll say is in terms of directly addressing equity, ideally, we actually get behind initiatives that are led by people of color and boots on the ground help get the work done. If we can't do that, maybe at least we can get out of the way.
You know, I'm so glad some of the questions, we're not waiting to the end to answer your questions because we want to make sure that you get your questions in. Some of your questions are on our list and we've got an appropriate time for them, especially like the what's next questions. So we're not ignoring those, but we are going to hold those questions until a little bit as we get closer to the end. Now, when it comes to what you're doing in your organizations and how you're encouraging the young people to remain hopeful in spite of all the things that they're hearing and what they're going through. You know, we as adults know how difficult it is to navigate emotions, right? I mean, look at the divorce rate. Look at the lawsuits. We have a lot of problems. So it's understandable that our kids have problems too. How have you learned to deal constructively, personally, with shame, internalized or external? How have you learned to teach or communicate without shaming? And how do you recognize shaming in others? John?
I have an expression that I use often, is that when someone, so let me take a step back and say I've encountered this a lot. You know, I could be on a stage talking to people, a room full of people, and inevitably someone after will come up to me and say, I'm so glad that you speak English well, or I'm so glad that you speak without an accent, and sort of to bring it down to expressions of what they don't understand. And so the expression that I have is that when someone says something that bothers you or upsets you or that speaks to maybe a lack of information or bias, you have 2 options. You can shut them down or you can educate them. But once you do one, you can't do the other anymore. You have to make a decision whether you're going to be an educator in the community and move a dialogue forward and help sort of open people's awareness, or whether you're going to be someone who teaches people not to say things. I think history has shown us already what happens when we just teach people what they're not supposed to say out loud or outside of their house. I think what we need is to sort of be able to have those dialogues even if they're uncomfortable. I could sit with the discomfort. I might decide to say, I might decide to give them feedback and say, you know, it's funny you should say that, but you know, there are actually a lot of Latinos who speak English and who are really well educated, and I'm proud to be the person who represents that for you, or whatever. So maybe it means having a little bit of compassion or grace, and so I think there's room for that in our dialogue, to be able to say, here's a human being coming towards me with a flawed understanding or something that upsets me or that offends me. I'm going to take the angle of saying, where is the role here for me to sort of make this human connection and to be graceful and compassionate in my response to them.
Great. We're getting very close to our quitting time, so I'm going to try to move forward, and I know some of you want to jump in and answer some of the questions, but time's just not going to permit everybody to be able to answer everything, and I want to make sure we get our audience questions answered as well. So I will ask you now, when you know, having responded there about how your organization is impacting equity right here in Oak Park and River Forest, what kind of help do you need? Do you feel supported by the community at large? Kind of what would make a difference? And if you look out at the community, we've got business owners, we have leaders in the community, other organizations, parents, individuals. What kind of help do you need to foster change on a regular basis? Michaela?
So at OPRF, there's a lot of funding towards sports like wrestling and football and all of that, but like clubs that support people in need, we don't have funding, and we don't have people like to represent for us, especially like older people. And that could be because some of the clubs are new, but it's just really hard to like get your foot through the door, and there's like no help at all. We don't have numbers at our board meetings really that we would like to see. There's no one coming to our rallies, our marches, or anything. There's like small numbers. There's the same people that are there when we're having panels and forums to educate people on race. The people that are there don't need to be there. There's nothing, there's always something to learn, but like, they're just exceeding their capacity at this point. And the people that we want to come to actually learn don't show up. And also I'm noticing that there aren't a lot of like young men of color that show up to any of our things or marches or anything because they don't feel supported. It's really hard when society is like turning their back on them to support a whole group of people. And it's just, I'm watching like these people of color that I'm growing up with and these men who have raised me and who I come from, just like they feel like shamed if they show any emotion. So supporting them and like telling men of color just that you love them or you care about them and their opinions are valued, that would help a lot, because they don't want to come and talk about what they're actually going through in SAFE. They don't want to come to Blue and talk about what they're going through. They don't want to come speak at a rally because they're scared of rejection, because that's all they know. So if you just, see someone, a man of color, a young man of color, and just tell them that you love them and just help them out, support them, let them talk to you, that helps a lot too. Thanks.
Great. As Carmen makes her way up to the podium, I'm going to combine these last three questions. So somebody is asking that we not remove racism from the conversation, but make the conversations less about experience and more about problem solving and solutions. Now, I will say, I think what Francis said earlier speaks to that, and that's that it's been so long that people have waited to have these conversations, that hearing the stories of people is part of problem solving. Someone has said that they believe most people have good intentions, but it's the small majority that seem to have the ability to negatively affect marginalized people. What do you think can be done to remove the bad actors that continue to maintain the status quo? Example, Teachers that have been found to be harmful to students by saying nigger 4 times in a classroom. Maui?
So, I honestly, I wish I had the magic solution. I don't. I do think that the people that are being marginalized know they're being marginalized, know what they want, know the outcomes. You know, where I'm struggling is how do I get the people that are marginalized people to see that and to actually commit to change, right? Like if we're saying that all these systems are built with this baked in, then why aren't we creating new systems? Why aren't we creating new spaces, right? Like we say, well, what do we do? How do we fix this, but also keep all the things that we love about America? Well, those things are all tied into each other, right? So like, how do we find the courage to tear it all down and try again? I guess that's what I would say.
All right, as you all get ready to give your website addresses on how people can contact you, we're going to ask you to do one thing. We promised that we would get every question. We've got one more question from the audience. So this person is asking about the young people. So they're saying that an example has more followers than reason, and that we unconsciously, and some of you have spoken to this, we unconsciously imitate what pleases us and approximate to characters that we most admire. Describe an experience you've had or witnessed of a child's expression, of a child's behavior being validated. Something that parents can hear and youth leaders can hear. Anybody?
The last assembly we had for hate crimes, a few students, one of them was from SAFE, they started, they walked out from the assembly, they got on stage, they protested, they were upset, they were grieving the hate crimes, and the superintendent actually turned the mic from the podium to them so that everybody could hear them, and that was the most recent thing that happened. That just showed that people are listening, that the board is listening, administrators are actually listening now, they care, and yeah, that was pretty dope, yeah.
Okay. Now, our panelists will be here afterwards. You'll stay around for a little bit in case people want to come up and talk with you?
No, I have rehearsal I have to get to. I'm in tech week right now.
What's your web address or email address where people can contact you? Yeah.
We have echotheatercollective.org, or you can find us on Facebook, Echo Theater Collective. I will say real quick, so I'm in Tech Week right now on Free to Be You and Me. A lot of you guys might remember that from back in the day. We have a lot of local children that are doing some great work, and you get to see me dress up like a giant baby. I'm the Mel Brooks baby, and I sing It's All Right to Cry as well. So come check that out, November 30th through December 9th. My partner, Allison, my Echo partner, is here, and she would beat me up if I did not mention that. So, yeah, there you go.
Dot, what's your email address or website?
It's a mouthful, but it's just like it's written, raceconsciousdialogues.com. And just to quickly amplify Michaela's point, the easiest thing that we can do with children and adults in terms of validation is to listen and believe.
Francis?
Period.
And I would confirm that again. I feel that the work we see that really takes hold is when we let our students, our young people lead it. They know what's needed. We're on Facebook, ET Moke Park, and our website is etmokepark.com.
John?
We're collabforkids.org, collab number 4 kids.org. And to build upon that, one thing to know about children under 5, they're listening and learning from everything that you do and say, even though we don't think they are, and even though they don't think we're taking it in, and they're very conscious of the cultural and racial undertones of all of your conversations. So anything that happens in your house, anything that you allow to be said, anything that you express, they learn, even though they don't yet have the complexity to put it back out so that you can hear it or have them reflected to you. Know that when if you are a white person and you pass a black child on the street and you say, "What a beautiful little girl," they're learning something about your perceptions of other people's race and their value, and that you think that you can look at someone from another race and find them to be beautiful and valuable as well, as an example.
You can find us on Facebook, Zingela Ulwazi. You can also join us every third Saturday, mostly at the libraries, but we will be next month teaming up with A Colorful Holiday, which is an event that features minority businesses of color in the Oak Park area. So that will be over, what churches?
We're doing it at Euclid.
Euclid. We're over at Euclid Church. We'll be on stage from 11 to 12 doing some reading, as well as some crafts with the kids as well. And
Thanks, Christian.
We don't have a super cool email. So you could just hit me up at manderson57@oprfhs.org.
Thank you, Michaela. So let's give our panel a hand. Folks, we need a new approach to partnership and responsibility. Some of the things that the panelists talked about is we have to listen better. We've got to listen more carefully and respectfully to each other, to everybody throughout the community. Bringing people together needs a new look too. We've got to do it not in confrontation, but in trust. We have some serious problems, and we need to handle them seriously and seriously together. When we look for solutions, let's look for what is right, not who is right. Let's help each other to step outside of our comfort zones and begin unimaginable relationships. Refusing to stereotype, honoring each of us the best that we bring. I do not believe that we have come this far to give up. So let's join these awesome leaders on the ground, making a difference for excellence, justice, equity, and reconciliation. Let's agree to hold ourselves, our community, and institutions accountable where we know change is needed. I thank you for a dynamic conversation, and thank you for having me. I thank the Wednesday Journal and Say Connect, Linda Francis and Dan Haley, and now I bring you Carmen Rivera. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doris. Thank all of you for attending. We appreciate you being here. On behalf of Say Connects and Wednesday Journal, we thank you for taking time out to bring your voices and your concerns to our conversations. Thank you, panelists. We do need to continue the conversations, as you know, so we are hosting another event on January 17th, right here at Julian again. So keep an eye out for those notices, print ads, all the way you found out about this. And the next thing I want to ask you is to please, that survey link that's in this ad right here, I want you to just take a minute. You could do it on your phone, you could do it at home. It is on the ad. If you found us on the Facebook ad, there's a little query box where you could just scan it and do the quick link, because that helps us help to determine where our panelists, which way we'll go for the next conversation. So if there's something else you want to know, if there's another route you think we should take, because it is a big world, everyone, but it takes our village too. So again, thank you all for coming, and happy holidays and good night. To do it now. I do encourage you to do it now, but I know that the internet is iffy in here, so that's why I said you're gonna just take a picture of this, and we'll see you soon. Thank you all.